15 years trapping alone in the Rockies. A lost traveler changed everything. The trap was frozen into the creek bed so hard I had to chip it free with the back of my hatchet. And while I was doing that, kneeling in water up to my forearm, I noticed I hadn't spoken a word in 11 days. I knew the count because I marked the doorpost. A notch for each morning I woke up and the cabin was still standing and I was still in it. 11 notches since I'd been down to Harlow's trading post. 11 days of nothing but the wind off the peaks and the crack of ice settling in the night, and the particular silence a man gets used to when he's decided, without quite saying so, that silence is all he deserves. The trap came free. I set it again, reset the bait, moved on up the creek to the next one. That was my life, has been my life, 15 years of it. I'd come up into the Rockies after the thing with the Carver brothers. That's not a story I'll tell here, but it cost me my brother Ike, my horse, and whatever part of a man believes the world operates on anything like fairness. I went up into the high country with a mule, $200 of outfitting, and the specific intention of not being around people anymore. I did not expect to be good at it. Turns out I was. Turns out some men are built for solitude the way a post is built for a fence. You can live your whole life as part of something, part of a family or a town, and then one day something cuts you loose, and you discover the only thing holding you in place was the other posts around you. Take those away and you stand just fine on your own. You're still upright. You just don't know anymore what the fence was for. I built a cabin the first winter, chinked it badly, froze half to death, rebuilt the chinking in spring. I learned to track. I learned to set beaver traps and fox snares and the particular trick of reading a hillside for sign, a bent grass stem, a turned stone, a smell in the air so faint most men wouldn't call it a smell at all. I learned the peaks around me the way you learn a face, every draw and saddle, the creek that ran clear and the one that ran chalky with melt, where the elk wintered and where the wolves pushed them off the flats in February. I traded furs down at Harlow's 4 times a year, bought flour and coffee and nails and a new trap or two, said as few words as necessary, and came back up. Harlow's wife, a Crow woman named Agnes, would look at me sometimes in a way that made me feel like I was a piece of gear she was assessing for wear. I didn't mind. She wasn't wrong. 15 years. I was 53 years old by the time any of this happened. The beard was gray. The knuckles were knobbed from cold and work. I slept 4 hours some nights because the hip woke me, and I went about my business on 3 because there was always more of it. I did not think I was unhappy. That's the thing I need you to understand. I did not walk around feeling sorry for myself. I was not a brooding man. I got up and I worked and I ate and I slept and I did it again. And if there was a place inside me that had gone dark and quiet, the way a room goes dark when you close the shutters, I had been in that room long enough that I'd stopped noticing the dark. Then the horse came down the south draw on a Tuesday morning in late October, and there was a woman on it, and she was in serious trouble. I heard the horse before I saw it. Wrong gait, stumbling, blowing hard. The kind of rhythm that means the animal has been pushed past sense and is running on something other than want. I was on the slope above the draw checking a set I'd laid 3 days prior, and I stood up and looked down, and there she was. The horse was a good animal, dark bay, but its flanks were crusted with sweat gone cold and it was picking its feet badly on the slope. The woman on it was gripping the saddle horn with both hands. She had a canvas pack tied on behind, a rifle in the scabbard, and she was dressed for town wool coat, not a trail coat, with buttons instead of ties, and boots that were never made for stirrups. She was not dressed for what had clearly happened to her, which was that she had gotten badly, dangerously lost in October in the Rockies. I stepped out from the pines so as not to spook the horse and I called down. She pulled up hard, nearly came off, got herself steady, looked up at me on the slope. Even from 30 yards I could see the exhaustion in the way she was sitting, that particular collapse of a person who has been holding themselves upright by will alone and has about run through the will. I came down to her, She was younger than I expected. Not young, maybe 35, 36, but younger than the circumstances suggested she should be, if that makes sense. She had dark hair coming down out of what had been a careful arrangement under her hat, and her face was wind-burned red across the cheekbones, and her hands on the reins were shaking. Not from cold alone. She'd been frightened. "They're a settlement east," she said. No greeting. She'd been moving so long she'd gotten down to essentials. 6 hours in good weather, I said. "Storm coming in. Where'd you come from?" She told me. Claypool Creek Camp. She'd been traveling with a survey party, men mapping the northern drainage for a railroad concern out of Denver. 2 days ago they'd split to cover more ground, and she'd gone with the surveyor named Alcott to mark the eastern ridge. Alcott had taken a fall. His horse had rolled on him, and he'd died on the slope 6 hours from anywhere, and she'd had to make the choice: stay with the body or try to find her way out. She'd made the choice a person with good sense makes. She'd been riding since then with one stop to rest the horse. She told me all this in a flat voice, the voice of someone who has already used up the shock and is now just dealing with what's left. I'd heard that voice before. It's not a voice people put on. You can't fake it. I looked at the sky. The clouds building on the northwest peaks had a yellow-gray edge that I knew well. We had 4 hours, maybe 5. "You won't make it to the settlement," I said. "My cabin's a mile up the creek. Come." She looked at me for a moment. I understood the look. She was assessing, the way any person with sense assesses a strange man in an empty place. I let her look. I didn't have anything to say that would help that assessment along. Either she trusted what she saw or she didn't. She clicked the bay forward. Her name was Vera Marsh. I learned that while I was seeing to her horse, and she was standing in my doorway, taking in the inside of the cabin the way a person takes in a foreign country they have read about but not visited. I got the tack off the bay and rubbed him down with a grain sack and put him in the lean-to and gave him what corn I had. And when I came inside, she was sitting on the bench near the stove with her coat still on, and her hands wrapped around a tin cup I'd poured coffee into without asking. "Thank you," she said. "Storm'll pass by morning," I said. "I'll get you down to the main track." She nodded, drank the coffee. The stove had warmed the room, and I could see her start to come back into herself the way a person does when danger becomes past tense. The shaking in her hands eased. She took a full breath. I made food: salt pork, dried beans, some of the cornbread I'd baked 3 days prior that was going stiff but wasn't gone yet. She ate like she hadn't eaten. I watched her hands. They were not soft hands. There were ink stains on the first 2 fingers of her right, permanent ones, and there was a callus at the base of her middle finger that comes from years of writing. She'd been working a pencil for a long time. "What are you writing?" I said. She looked up. "I beg your pardon." I nodded at her hand. She looked at it, turned it over, looked back at me. "I'm a correspondent," she said, "for the Denver paper. I was traveling with the survey to report on the railroad proposal for the northern route." "What do you think of the northern route?" She looked at me again. It was the look of someone recalibrating, like she'd filed me under one category and needed to move me to another. I didn't say anything. "I think it will cut through country that doesn't need cutting," she said. "But that's not what I was sent to write." "What were you sent to write?" "That it's a fine idea, and the investors should be reassured." "And will you?" A pause. The fire cracked. Outside the wind was picking up, starting to sift snow against the one window. "I haven't decided yet," she said. I got out the bedroll I kept for the mule. I didn't keep a spare for guests because I didn't have guests, and I put it on the floor near the stove, and I slept on my bunk as I always did. In the night the storm came in full, and the cabin groaned, and the chinking I'd repaired twice that fall held, and I lay there listening to it and aware, in a way I couldn't name quite yet, that the room had changed. Not physically, but a room with a person in it is a different room. I'd forgotten that. 15 years, and I'd forgotten that a room has weight to it when someone else is breathing in it. I didn't sleep much, that wasn't new. The storm lasted 3 days. I won't pretend I planned it. The storms in those mountains don't ask your permission. This one came in off the northwest and sat, the way the bad ones do, and dropped 2.5 feet of snow over 36 hours, and then sealed the world under a cold so dense and specific it had a sound to it, a high, thin ringing in the air, the cold itself vibrating. Temperatures I'd lived through before but didn't enjoy. We were stuck. I want to be honest about what those 3 days were, because there's a way to tell it that makes it romantic right away, and it wasn't that. The first day she slept most of it, genuinely exhausted, the kind of sleep that is almost illness, and I went about my work, checking what traps I could reach, splitting wood, patching a gap in the lean-to roof that the storm had opened up. I came in and cooked, and she ate and slept again. I read. I have books, not many, 7 or 8, read so many times the spines are gone, and I read and the storm pressed on the walls and she slept. The second day she was up in herself, and the cabin was very small. I've lived alone long enough that I'd forgotten what it was to have to accommodate another person's presence, the small social adjustments, the awareness of where someone is in a room, the monitoring that happens whether you want it or not. She had the same problem. She was a woman who lived, I could see it, in a particular way, organized, self-sufficient, careful about her own space and other people's. She'd been on the trail enough to know how to be useful without asking, and by the second morning she'd found the broom and swept the floor and reorganized the split wood by the stove without saying anything about it. I noticed and said nothing. She noticed that I'd noticed and said nothing. We ate breakfast in a quiet that was not unpleasant. After, she asked if she could look at my traps. Not at the trap line, we couldn't go out in that. At the traps themselves, the ones I had stacked and hanging on the north wall, a couple dozen of them in various conditions. I told her she could. She spent the better part of an hour going through them, turning them over, reading them the way she'd read anything, systematically, trying to understand how they worked. She asked good questions. Not shy questions, not polite questions, questions that wanted real answers. How did the set work? How did I choose a location? What was the difference between a spring trap and a jaw trap for a given animal? What did I do when a trap took something I didn't want? I answered. I hadn't talked about my work in a long time. Harlow's boy sometimes asked questions, but he was 12 and didn't really want the answers. He just wanted the talking. Vera Marsh wanted the answers. By afternoon she was writing. She'd pulled a small notebook from her pack, and she wrote in it while I worked at the table on a pair of moccasins I'd been resoling for a month. The scratch of her pencil and the sound of the awl and thread, these two sounds together. After an hour of it I realized I wasn't paying attention to the work. I was listening to her write. "You're not writing about me," I said. "No," she said. She didn't look up. "I'm writing about Alcott." I set the moccasin down. "I'm sorry," I said, "about Alcott." She stopped writing, set the pencil flat on the page, looked at the fire. "He was a good man," she said. "He didn't deserve to die on a hillside being carried off a slope by a horse. Nobody deserves that." A pause. "He had 2 daughters in Pueblo. I have to write to them." "I have paper," I said, "if you need it." She looked at me then. Not the assessing look from the first day, not the recalibrating look from dinner. Something quieter. "Thank you," she said. I went back to the moccasin. She went back to writing. The storm went on and the fire went on and the cabin held. The third night the cold broke. I could feel it through the wall even before I got up, a softening, the specific release that comes when a hard cold lets go, the way a muscle lets go. I got dressed and went outside and stood on the step in the dark. 4 in the morning, sky clearing from the west, stars coming out over the peaks one group at a time. The snow had settled and the top crust had hardened, and when I breathed out the cloud went up straight, no wind. I stood there for a while. I heard the door behind me. She came out and stood beside me. She had her coat on, hair down, and she stood on the step and looked up at the sky the same way I was looking at it, not saying anything, just looking. The stars in that country, at that altitude, in that cold, are not like the stars anywhere else. They are so numerous and so bright they almost have a sound. After a while she said, "It's clearing." "By morning," I said, "we can go down tomorrow." She didn't say anything. "I'll take you to the main track," I said. "From there it's a straight ride east to the settlement." "I know," she said. Another silence, a long one, not an uncomfortable one. "What made you stay up here?" she said. 15 years. I thought about how much to say. I decided to say the truth of it because there was no good reason not to. I told her about Ike, about the Carver brothers, about coming up into the mountains with a mule and $200 and the intention of not being around people anymore, and how that intention had hardened into habit and then into something that didn't feel like a choice anymore, just what I did. She listened, didn't interrupt, didn't try to fill the silences in the middle of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Are you sorry?" she said. I thought about it, really thought about it, standing there in the dark with the stars coming out over the peaks. "Some days," I said, "not most of them." "What about today?" I didn't answer right away. The question sat in the cold air between us. "Today I'm not sure," I said. She looked at me then. In the starlight I could see her face clearly, the wind burn on her cheekbones, the dark of her eyes, the particular stillness of a person who is listening with everything they have. "That's honest," she said. "I'm generally honest," I said. "It's one of the few things I've kept up." She almost smiled, not quite. We went back inside. I made coffee because there was nothing else to make at 4 in the morning, and we sat at the table across from each other and drank it. The stove was warm. The cabin was warm. She had her notebook open, but she wasn't writing in it. She was looking at the table. "Alcott told me about you," she said. I looked up. "Not you specifically. He'd heard there was a trapper up on this drainage, been up here since before the survey was authorized. He thought you might be willing to talk to me for the piece I was writing, about what the railroad route would mean for the trappers and hunters still working the high country." She paused. "I was going to try to find you." I sat with that a moment. "What do you want to know?" I said. She looked up from the table. "Everything," she said. "But tonight I'd settle for what it's actually like, not the romantic version, the real one." So I told her. I talked for 2 hours, longer than I'd talked in 15 years combined, maybe. I told her what the winters were like and what the springs were like, and what it was like to go 11 days without speaking and not notice until you were kneeling in a frozen creek. I told her about the elk that had come down to the creek below the cabin every morning for 3 years running, the same bull, until one winter he didn't come. I told her about the time a rock slide had taken out a section of the trapline and I'd spent 4 days rebuilding it in a cold snap, and on the 4th night had sat in the snow for a while longer than was wise, not quite caring enough to get up. I hadn't told anyone that. I didn't plan to tell her. It came out because the hour was late and the fire was warm, and she was listening the way she listened, as if what I said mattered to her. She wrote some of it down, not all. When I noticed she'd set the pencil aside, I asked her why. "Because you're not talking to the paper now," she said. "You're talking to me." I looked at her. "Is that all right?" she said. "Yes," I said, "that's all right." In the morning I saddled her bay and my own horse, and we went down the south draw and then east along the creek and then out onto the bench where the main track crossed. It was a cold, clear morning, the snow bright enough to hurt your eyes, and the horses moved well on the packed crust. We didn't talk much. There was a lot to look at. The country was different after a new snow. The same country I'd looked at for 15 years, but different. The way familiar things look different when you see them through someone else's eyes. At the track she pulled up, and so did I. We sat the horses for a moment. 6 hours to the settlement," she said. "Straight east, you won't miss it." She nodded, looked east down the track. looked back at me. "I'm going to write the piece," she said. "The real one, not the one I was sent to write." "That'll cost you," I said. "Probably," she said. "I've been writing what I was sent to write for 6 years. I think I'm done with that." I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything useful to say. She reached into her pack and pulled out one of the folded pages from her notebook, held it out to me. I took it. Her handwriting was very clear, even on the rough paper, small and upright. "My address in Denver," she said, "in case you ever come down from the mountain." I looked at the paper, looked up at her. "I don't generally come down from the mountain," I said. "I know," she said, "in case." We looked at each other for a moment. The cold was sharp and the horses breathed clouds. Somewhere up on the ridge, a jay went off about something. "Thank you," she said, "for the shelter." "You were no trouble," I said. She almost smiled again. This time it got further. Then she reached across the distance between the horses, leaned over and put her hand on my arm, just above the wrist, just for a moment. Her hand was steady, warm through the wool of my sleeve. She looked at me the way she'd been looking at me that whole last morning, like she saw something she thought was worth seeing. "Be well, Cal," she said. Then she turned the bay east and rode. I sat there and watched her go. She didn't look back. The track east was straight, and I watched her until she was a small dark shape against the white, and then a shape I had to work to find, and then nothing. The sky above the peaks was the color of a pried-open mussel shell, pale and cold and lit from somewhere. I turned my horse north and started back up. That was November. I'm telling this in February. I came down in December for my quarter-end trade at Harlow's, the way I always do. Agnes looked at me the way she always did, that inventory look, but this time something must have been different because she looked longer. Didn't say anything. Agnes never said anything unless she had to. I posted a letter. I don't know exactly when I decided I was going to do that. It wasn't one moment. It was more like the decision had been made sometime in the 3 days of the storm, and I'd just been slow to find out about it. I bought paper from Harlow and sat at the table in the back of the store and wrote it out, and it took me 4 tries because I kept writing things that sounded like letters from a man who'd been alone for 15 years, which I am, but I didn't want the letter to sound that way. I wanted it to sound like a man talking to a person he hadn't quite stopped thinking about. I don't know how good I did at that. I sent it. She wrote back in January. Her letter came up with a supply run, a freighter Harlow knew who went up toward the mining camps when the weather let him. The paper was Denver paper, thin and cream-colored, and her handwriting on it was exactly the way I'd remembered it, small and upright and very clear. She wrote 4 pages. I read them in the Linta, so Harlow wouldn't see my face. She'd written the piece, the real one, about what the Northern Railroad route would do to the drainage and the country and the men who still worked it, about the elk country and the trappers who'd been up there since before the territory was organized, about Alcott and the kind of men who did the actual work of knowing that land. She said her editor had taken it without the fight she expected, and then sent her to find out about a mining claim dispute up near the pass, and she'd done that. She was working on something about the Indian Territory negotiations. She was busy. And then at the end she wrote, "I've been thinking about what you said, about the room going dark and not noticing. I think you noticed more than you knew. I think you've been noticing for a long time. I think that's part of why you talked the way you did that night, and I want you to know that I heard it." I sat in the lean-to for a while after that. Then I went back inside and got my things and settled with Harlow and rode back up to the cabin. The mountains were the same mountains. The trapline was the same trapline. The creek ran the same way under the ice, and the elk were in the lower meadow where they always were in February, and the peaks above the cabin caught the last light the way they always caught it, all that orange going gray. But the cabin felt different when I came in. I couldn't say how exactly. I built the fire up and made coffee, and I sat at the table and I looked at the notch marks on the doorpost. I counted them, 10 since I'd been down. I looked at the marks for a while. Then I got up and got my knife and I cut a small notch that wasn't for a day. I cut it sideways, across the vertical ones. A different kind of mark. I'm not sure I could explain what I meant by it to anyone else, but I knew what I meant. I meant something changed here. This door has been open, and I want to remember that. I'm writing to her again tonight. The lamp is burning and the creek is running under the ice, that low sound it makes in February, and outside the snow is old and gray on the north sides, and the melt has started on the south-facing slopes, just at the edge, just the first softening. The peaks are still white all the way down. Give it 6 weeks. I don't know what happens next. I'm 53 years old and I'm a trapper in the Rocky Mountains, and I have been alone a very long time, and I am not entirely sure I know how not to be. But I'm thinking about it. That's something. That is actually something, because there was a time, not that long ago, when I wasn't thinking about anything at all. She wrote, I heard it. I have been in this room a long time. It got dark and I got used to the dark, the way you do. The way a man can get used to almost anything if he gives it long enough. And then the door opened and the light came through and I could see the room again, and it turned out it wasn't as dark as I'd been thinking. It turned out there was a window I'd forgotten about. It turned out the window had been there all along. The fire's warm, the letters on the table. I dip the pen and I start.